bread contains gluten. Gluten, the best way to think of it is like a rubber band. When you start working with it, it becomes very stretchy and it wants to snap right back. So if you try to roll it out right away, as you're rolling it, it's going to roll out nice and beautifully. And as soon as you stop, it's going to shrink right back almost to where you started. Hi, my name is Susan Dupre. I am a food scientist. I've been working in the food industry for over 30 years. We are here today to talk about food and how it pertains to our memories and our culture, which is something I'm very, very passionate about. Over here is my little troll dog, Maisie. We're going to make a recipe called Cornish pasty, which is a very, very old recipe dating back. There's recorded evidence of it in the 11th century. Primarily, Cornish pasties were served to miners in Wales. People would take this down to the mine, they would eat them, and typically they're made with vegetables because meat was very scarce. Another thing that occasionally appears is where people would tip. One side of it would be savory and the other side would be sweet. So they would eat that, they would have their dinner and their dessert. So one of the things that's very interesting about pasties, as I mentioned earlier, they were eaten by miners in Wales. You would think that someone would they're kind of football shaped, and you would think you would just pick them up in your hand and kind of eat it like a hot dog from one end to the other. But what people would do was something different than what we would do today. They would actually eat from the top seam down to the bottom. They would hold it in two hands, eat it from the top down. And there are several reasons for this. One was superstition, which they felt like they had to feed the ghosts of past winners that died in the mines. The other part was because they were handling um, different ores, they could be contaminated with arsenic, which is very, very toxic. So what they would do is hold it in their hands, eat it from the top seam down, and then throw the bottom portion away. And that would keep them from consuming a lot of toxic metals. These pasties were eaten by people that were very, very poor, people that were very marginalized. And because they were very poor, typically, you would not see any meat in the filling. If they had some meat scraps, they may throw them in there so that they wouldn't get wasted. And they also could flavor the rest of the vegetables. So typically, what was in a pasty would be tomatoes, swedes, or what most people nowadays call turnips, and onions. And these were foods that were not typically fed to people of upper crust. So if you were in a household with moderate means, you probably were not eating any of these vegetables. So these vegetables were for the poorest of the poor. Nowadays, we view it as very differently because culturally, it's something different. A lot of people, you know, doesn't matter your socioeconomic status, will eat potatoes, onions, or less commonly turnips. Um, so what also is interesting is as these pasties were brought to the New World, specifically to the United States, you see a lot of this blending of different cultures. So people who moved here from Wales would make pasties. They would show their neighbors how to make them. they would have ingredients from their own culture and thought, hey, this is a great idea. And a lot of times people would say, oh, I have a leftover, pot roast or stew. And they would put that in the pasty casing, bake it. And if they liked it a lot enough, they would make it again. So nowadays, you will see pasties that are vegan. You will see them as vegetarian, though historically they probably were vegetarian, or at least the filling was vegetarian. And you also see blending of Hispanic flavors. So you see chilies. You might see, like chili chicken, um, something of that variation in there. And when you bite into it, you can't separate one culture up from another. So as a food, it has evokes very strong memories. Culturally, we bring food with us. Food is a very, very strong component of a person's culture and part of their cultural identity. As different people marry, so for example, if somebody from Wales married somebody that was of Hispanic descent, you might see this blending, as I talked about, of what we'd associate more of a Mexican filling in the traditional pasty casing. And this is wonderful because in the United States, we are a melting pot. We tend to think nowadays that, immigration, cultural differences are a bad thing. But we have to remember that there are so many positive things that brings us together. And one of those big influences is food. You know, there's always a talk about people breaking bread together. Um, in Christian society, the Last Supper. So food is very, very important in almost every single culture. And we associate very, very strong memories. Another thing is, we look at food as a means of learning about somebody else. So you might eat Indian food and it might be new to you. So you want to go learn about that culture and you see that as in a positive light. So food is a springboard for many, many other things that could be very positive.